I'm Reverend Phil, and I'm your host for Words of the Prophets. Where are our prophets now? Where are those messages God chooses to communicate divine revelation through? In the past, the Creator has sent prophets like Abraham, Siddhartha, Jesus, Muhammad, and many more. Maybe our higher power has switched tactics since we reinterpret God's words as soon as the Creator's prophets leave us. Could it be that Spirit talks to each one of us individually and we haven't learned to listen? On Words of the Prophets, our modern prophets show us how to find the internal prophet that is the I Am, and we discuss the application of spiritual principles in all aspects of our lives. Love and light, everybody. I'm Reverend Phil, and I'm your host for Words of the Prophets. Today, special show, special guest, my good dear friend, my soulmate, Washali. Hi there.
Wild man, fellow wild man. And I want to take a particular note right now. I want everybody to appreciate the purple bandana.
In your honor.
That I am truly touched.
And in Washali's honor, the credits we are running underneath our names will be in purple as well. So as we do every day, every show, today we have a prophetic topic, and the topic is You Are What You Love. And that's a very special meaning because Washali, besides being the Purple Highness, is also an author. One of the books is You Are What You Love. The other book is Wisdom Rising. She also has 2 radio shows, one over the airwaves and one over the internet. Both of them are also called You Are What You Love. And we're going to get into what that means and where it comes from. But that is today's prophetic topic. And I want to just read it for you because it's part of a, where is it? Here it is. On page 18 of You Are What You Love, in the introduction, it says, You are what you love. You do not exist or live separately from what you love. You are what you love, and you love whatever you are giving your attention to. And that is probably the most important advice you're ever going to get. And we're going to get into that in a little while. But before we do that, I want to, Spirit works in strange ways. And in my case and in Washali's case, it's about really giving us adversarial conditions, adversaries, not necessarily to toughen us, but to teach us maybe compassion, to teach us understanding, to teach us acceptance. And, I've talked about my beginnings, and you're familiar with them. Washali's got a slightly different story, but it's just, it's about overcoming adversary to get to that place where we could relate to people and help guide them out of those places they think they cannot get out of. And I'll just turn it over to you. You want to share a little bit of your story with everybody?
Like most stories, this one actually starts when I was born. And I was born with a birth defect on my face. And it required a number of cosmetic surgeries to correct it. And the thing about being a child and having cosmetic surgery on your face and it being intertwined with your muscles is that it doesn't really correct itself until you're in your late teens because your body's going through so many changes. So even though they did this corrective surgery, you could still, when I was 5, 6, 7, 8, you could still look at me and see that something was not right. And my first indoctrination to being socialized at kindergarten, I was really eager and excited to play with the kids. I mean, I was used to my disfigurement. It didn't disconcert me, but I was shocked to find how horrified the other kids were. And they, kids are not historically famous for their compassion towards kids that look different or are different. And I remember spending a lot of time running home after school because their thing was to stone the monster, to stone the freak. And that was challenging. And my parents divorced when I was 2. That's pretty common. I lived with my mother, I remained living with my mother, and she developed a relationship with a man. They married, and what they had in common is they could have used your services. They both shared the same undying passion for alcohol consumption. And
That's a volatile combination.
it's not pretty. And when one parent has a tendency to drink and get angry and be volatile, it's challenging. When they're both unpredictable, there's no safe place. And then I went to live with my dad when I was 8. He finally got custody of us. We were not doing well with my mother. She wasn't around a lot, so we just kind of fended for ourselves as far as what we ate and got dressed and bathed or didn't bathe, and whatever a 5 or 6-year-old is going to do when they're on their own.
And you're probably better off for it.
I probably was. One of the things it did is my ability to play has remained intact, because there was never any supervision that came and disrupted the flow of that right into adulthood. And when I went to live with my dad, I was 8 years old, and I didn't know how to write. I couldn't write my own name. I didn't know how to write my full name. And I didn't think there was a problem with it. I mean, I know who I was, but the adults around me were completely freaking out. And this kind of was my first clue that maybe I wasn't getting a good education. I could barely read, could barely write. And there was a woman there, a special ed teacher, that took all the special kids and pulled them aside, and her job was to kind of bring them up into speed to meld them back into mainstream class activities. And I was the only special child in the class. And we spent a lot of time together. And she was a lovely woman, very, very patient, very loving, very supportive. And I remember looking at her one day in Southern California, one of those beautiful Southern California days, and the sunlight is streaming through the window and it's lighting up her hair, and she's just looking angelic. And I remember thinking, I need a mother, so I'm going to make this woman my mother. And I remember taking that psychologically and emotionally, transferring that onto her. About a year later, this was in the late 60s, early 70s, at the time of the Charles Manson murders. Someone murdered her, and they wanted to make it look like it had been part of the Manson murders. So I won't get into it. That's all you need to know. It was horrific. And when I heard about it, I went completely amnesic for several years and couldn't even remember her. It was just too stressful that this had happened. And then later on, of course, adolescence. Who is adolescence not traumatizing to? How do any of us live through our teenage years? And when I got into my 20s, well, let me just put it this way. Every intimate relationship I had up until my 40s lied and cheated on me. I know a lot about that. And when I was in my mid-20s, I was diagnosed terminal for the first time. I like to call myself a terminal overachiever because I've been diagnosed terminal twice. So the second time was in my late 30s after a car accident. So I've lived with years and years and years of the kind of pain you would jump off of a building to get out of. My boyfriend now always makes a joke. It was a good thing I lived on the first floor.
Hard to commit suicide.
On the first floor. And I know what it's like to be in pain for years. And as a consequence of being in such fragile health and in such incredible crippling pain for years, I couldn't work a lot of times. The second time I was diagnosed terminal, I lost my business. I couldn't work. I was going through divorce. I went through all of my savings, and it was very challenging. So my favorite joke, and this is in Wisdom Rising, is before I was born, God said, "Who wants to learn through more pain?" And I thought God said, "Who wants to learn through more gain?" And I asked for extra.
Let's get into just a little bit deeper level. How did you overcome basically 2 death diagnoses? I mean, was it something you did, something you didn't do, combinations thereof?
It was a combination of things. The first thing that happened is this revolution happened internally. And the seed of that revolution is Emanuel Swedenborg's wisdom. You are what you love, and you love whatever you give your attention to. And when I first heard this, I was diagnosed as terminal. I was in a lot of pain, and I thought, this is really interesting. I've never heard one's spiritual identity defined this way before. You are what you love. Okay, that's interesting. I can go with that. So what is it that you love? Whatever you give your attention to. And I thought, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to write down what I give my attention to over the course of one day. Because how repetitive are our thoughts, really? I mean, they're grossly repetitive. And I thought, I'm just going to, all the little inner things I tell myself about my value, my power, my worth, my abundance, the present moment, I'm just going to write down all the little things that I tell myself. And at the end of the day, I'm going to see what it is that I love. And I went through the day writing things down. At the end of the day, I looked over at that piece of paper and I thought, I could not die loving this crap. I can't do it. I can't. This terminal diagnosis may take me out. That may be fine. But before I go, I'm taking my love back from that waste. And that really started me looking at when I'm giving my attention to something, I'm giving it my love. Because my awareness and my attention and my love are indivisible. And when I'm looking at things like, I don't have enough time. I don't have enough money. This isn't going to work out for me. Everyone else on the planet is going to be happy, but me, I'm going to have a miserable, lonely existence. And when I give my attention to those things, I stop. And I ask myself, is this really what you want to do with your love? Is this really what you want to love? Or do you want to take your love and your power back? So it started with, what am I doing with my love? Watching my mind. And then I started studying Indian Ayurvedic medicine, Tibetan Ayurvedic medicine, and Chinese medicine, because they have a wonderful system of self-healing that doesn't take your being a spiritual creature out of the equation. Mm-hmm. They treat you as a spiritual being having a human experience, and how do you bring all that into balance? So I started studying those because they had some routines, they had some diet, they had some lifestyle that I really needed to piece my physical energy together. But I realized that my body was responding to what I was giving my love to. And that's where the revolution had to start, with taking my power back and taking my mind back and giving my love to something that dwells in an unlimited and infinite place.
And when you were doing that, were you also saying, I am part of that unlimited, infinite place?
I said, I don't have love.
I am love.
I am love. And when I look back on my life, and I look back at the various different hurdles, one of the things that I'm profoundly grateful for, one of the things that adversity has the potential to give you, is unconditional ownership of your divinity. Because I can look at my life right now, and from the depths of my soul, I know I don't have love, I am love. And as love, that also means I am value, I am power, I am worth. Because when was love separate from value, power, and worth? It can't be. I am one with abundance, because when did love lack for anything? And I know that I don't have love, I am love, and no one and no thing on this planet has the power to change that.
Exactly.
It brought me unconditional ownership of my divinity. Was it worth getting cheated on? Was it worth realizing I'm not my body and that the body goes through a process and I am beyond that? Absolutely. I mean, what is it worth to you to know that you are a force of love, that when the challenges come and go, and they will, because nobody gets a challenge-free life. Nobody lives in a vacuum free of suffering. It's part of the tuition.
We wouldn't grow if we didn't.
It's the tuition to this classroom. But to come out of it the other end, knowing I am divine love, and if this crap could not separate me from it, I have it. I am it unconditionally.
Now you talk about suffering, and one of the things that comes up a lot in, I'm sure it didn't originate in 12-step programs, but it's about pain is mandatory, suffering is optional.
Yes.
So we get the pain. What do I do with the pain? If I feel sorry for myself, if I try to avoid it, if I try to negate it, I suffer. If I deal with it, I don't suffer. I know one of the things that I love that you've said in your book is that God will never give itself a lesson it doesn't need. And if we are divine, we're giving ourselves our own lesson and we're choosing it. So the continuation of that is God doesn't set us up to fail. We set ourselves up to fail because we disconnect from the divine.
You know, one of the things that I constantly anchor when I have my radio show and people call up and they ask questions, or when people email me or they have a session, an individual session, and they ask questions, one of the truths that I keep anchoring everything back to is, and again, this comes from Emanuel Swedenborg, because if somebody said it better than him, then I'd be stealing it from somebody else, but I think he said it the best, so I'm going to steal it from him. He said that all of our suffering, all of our limitation, all of our fear, our anxiety, our neurosis, our psychoses, our worry, our insecurities, they all have one origin. And that origin is a mind that doesn't know who and what it is. And when you don't know that you are divine love, it creates a defective space in your mind, in your nervous system, in your human experience. And whatever pushed you out from ownership of your divinity moves into that defective space. And he says limited states like that don't exist in a mind that knows that it is love. It is impossible for those states to coexist in a mind that knows that it's love. So when I'm working with people, one of the things that I'm always bringing the conversation back to is, I'm listening to you and I'm listening to how you're sharing about your life, how you're sharing about how things are unfolding, and what your expectations are, and I'm listening to how you see yourself. And you see yourself as a loser, as a victim, as overwhelmed, overpowered, overworked. None of the way that you see yourself is as divine love. It is incapable for me to create a learning experience I do not need. So no matter what these challenges are, and are they unpleasant? Yes, I'm the queen of unpleasant challenges. I get that. But the point is, they have a gift for us.
And the gift is always the same.
Yes.
What am I giving my attention to? How do I see myself?
Exactly. It's
and that's always the gift. It's coming back to, am I a spirit being or am I a human being?
Am I owning the force of love that I am?
Exactly.
Or am I giving my power away? And one of the things that I found hardship is really good for is for practice. Practice. And one of the things that I adore practicing is, because everything that comes out of your mouth is an affirmation, is affirming there's only one power that I recognize, and it's divine love and wisdom. I'm choosing at this point in my life not to recognize the power of fear, not to recognize the power of intimidation, not to recognize the power of CNN, or as my sweetie likes to call it, continuous crisis network, not to recognize the power of the home shopping network, not to recognize the power of my ego when it says, you know, your butt looks too big for this outfit. There's only one power I'm choosing to recognize, and that's divine love and wisdom. And my life has offered me a plethora of opportunities to say, what power do you want to recognize now?
It always will.
And it always will.
And it'll give you new and different angles to really affirm who and what we really are.
Can you be love now? Can you be love now?
I'm always love.
Can you be love now?
If we believe that, exactly. You know, we've talked about this on other shows, not you and I, but with other guests. I mean, Jesus had the greatest statement, you know, love thy Lord thy God with thy whole thy mind, body, heart, and soul, and love thy neighbor as thyself. And that's where it all falls down, because if I don't love myself, I can't love my neighbor. And that's what we're talking about here. I am love. I don't need love. I am love. And therefore, if I could grasp that, if I could wrap myself around it, I keep it by giving it away.
And I don't have to continually set up a series of stupid humor tricks in my life to try and earn it or be deserving and worthy enough of it. Or wait till my dysfunctional family says, here's a few crumbs of deserving and worthy. They're small, take two. You know, I don't have it, I am it. Why would I need to prove something that I am? That owning it and that claiming it, because everything comes down to consciousness. And how can you extend or share something with somebody that you have no direct knowledge of yourself?
Exactly. You can't give away what you don't have. But once you recognize you have it, you keep it by giving it away. And after a while, you enhance it by giving it away. We are the conduits. We originate it, we conduit, and we give it out.
You know, on a planet where everything is finite, and obviously the more money you spend, unless you've got an earning situation that supersedes your outgo, you will eventually dwindle it away. But this relationship with love is the only exception to that rule. The more that you extend, the more you encompass, the more you embody, the more you live it on a moment-to-moment basis. And this whole idea of living it on a moment-to-moment basis, I know there are plenty of people who are listening and saying, well, I know I don't have love, I am love. Duh. And here's the point I want to make. We intellectualize wisdom incredibly. And intellectualizing things, storing it in your white and gray matter, doesn't mean that you know it. A bookshelf can accumulate wisdom, but that doesn't make it self-actualizing. So what you know is what you live.
You got to walk the talk.
And if you're not living, I'm a force of love and no one and no thing on this planet has the power to change that, then you don't know it. If you go to your mailbox and you open it up and you have intrepidation about that bill and think that, wise God, why are you punishing me every time I go to the mailbox? There's more suffering here for me. Why are you coming down and picking me out particularly to have this heightened suffering experience, which we all go through our own drama queen pity party waste. When we do that, when we go to the mailbox and we have intrepidation, when we watch the news and we feel that the government has more power than we do, we don't recognize that we're divine love. We're giving it away. We're not living it.
Exactly. I mean, this is the beauty of this whole process. Once we understand that we have it, nobody can ever take it. We can lay it down, we can give it away. But it's purely our own decision. Nobody can take it from us. They can lock us up, they can do whatever they want to us. But they can't get into your heart, and they can't get into your head, and they can't change it.
It's the beauty of free will, isn't it? I mean, I'm not saying that Madison Avenue out there doesn't want to tell you, you need to buy this car, you need to eat this chocolate bar, you won't have a good love life unless you wear this style of clothing. I'm not saying people aren't going to vie for your consciousness. I'm not saying that there aren't interested parties out there waving fear flags, trying to distract you, but ultimately,
we're responsible.
You decide what you do with your attention, what you do with your mind, what you give it to, and how you feel about what you're giving your attention to.
Exactly. So let's get on to this. You've dropped a hint a few times. Who is Emanuel Swedenborg?
Oh, my boyfriend. Yes, a man I like to call my boyfriend. And
not too possessive, but okay.
Well, to tell you the truth, he can be your boyfriend too. I mean, I'm willing to share.
Oh, okay.
For people who have not heard of Emanuel Swedenborg before, he lived from 1688 to 1772. He was born in Stockholm, Sweden. He was a great scientist, inventor, and mystic. He's in the Guinness Book of World Records for one of the largest IQs. And a few years ago, Stanford University decided that they wanted to come up with a list of the top 10 most brilliant people to have ever lived on the planet. And Stanford University voted Emanuel Swedenborg and two other people to be the most brilliant people. They tied for number one as the most brilliant person to have ever lived on the planet. And one of the guys that tied with Emanuel Swedenborg came after Swedenborg and was influenced by Swedenborg, so he kind of had a leg up. So Swedenborg is undisputed in being this intellectual giant. What most people don't know about him is, and if you Google him, and it's Sweden, like the country, B-O-R-G, be prepared to be in front of your computer for a year and a day because you're going to be hit with a tsunami of information. But he was great mystic, and he wrote over 35 volumes of work on the nature of the spiritual world. He did a GPS of the spiritual world, if you did. He mapped it out. And he wrote about how our human experience affects where we live spiritually. And if we're really spirit, if that's really what we are, why do we have to have a body? Why do we have to come to a three-dimensional world? What is in it for us to have a human experience? If we're really spirit, why do we need to come here and take a body and have this?
What did he answer to that?
You have to buy the book. I'm only kidding. I just really like that joke. He says, and we've already touched on this, when you come to the earth and you take a body, you've entered into an accelerated classroom. This law, you are what you love, and you love whatever you give your attention to. It's a spiritual law. And this law affects all of life. Life in a body, life out of a body, life on the planet Earth, life in various levels of heaven and hell. And he defines heaven as a place or a state of being that is unlimited, and hell is a place or a state of being that's limited.
So we could actually, if we don't buy into limitations in the physical plane, we could be in heaven.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And he says that nobody on the planet Earth has to die to know there's a heaven and a hell. We experience it right here now according to what we give our attention to. So this law, you are what you love, and you love whatever you give your attention to, organizes all of the spiritual realm, the higher levels of heaven and the lower realms of hell, and it organizes our physical world. And here's why having a body is a great accelerated gift in liberating your mind. When you come to the planet Earth, you get this lovely little thing called a nervous system, and you feel what's going on. And when you come to the Earth and you give attention to things like, I don't have enough time, I don't have enough money, you feel the consequences of it immediately. There is no ambiguity about, gee, did that live in a limited or unlimited place? You know it. And this is, the planet Earth is what I call the keep it real arena. Everything in the earth is designed to keep it real, reflect back to you, what are you doing with your love? What are you doing with your love? What are you doing with your love? Because you have to feel it here. And he says in the other spiritual realms, that kind of immediate, tangible feedback doesn't exist the way it does here.
Uh-huh. You know, you and I have had these conversations before. There's a whole story behind this, which we're not going to get into on the air, but where Charlie and I have talked about, because my guru, my boyfriend is Edgar Casey, and we've gone through this, my guru's better than your guru kind of stuff for on and off for years now. But that's exactly the way Casey describes the earth plane. It's about, you get to feel immediately the ramifications of your thoughts and your emotions, which is exactly what Swedenborg is talking about. And he talks about this is the only plane of existence that we occupy that allows us to do that. Casey talked about each of the planets in the solar system having a different lesson, and that ties into Casey's take on astrology. And you know, we sojourn, I love that phrase, that on these different planets, get different lessons. Then we come here to Earth and get a chance to really demonstrate those lessons and feel, am I getting it? You know, again, you are what you love what you give your attention to, and that gives you feedback immediately, like you've been talking about.
And I don't think Swedenborg would disagree with any of that.
Yeah, you know, they're very much in
compatible
sync with
boyfriends.
That. Yeah, exactly.
Of course, we only love the best.
Tell the story about how you really got introduced to Swedenborg.
Oh.
Well, because this is divine synchronicity.
This was when I was diagnosed terminal the first time.
Yeah.
And I was driving in my car and I was listening to a series of tapes. Remember when we used to listen to tapes? And
8-track or cassette.
Exactly. And a friend of mine had given me this tape collection. It was called, I think Secrets of the Masters or Pathways to the Masters. And it was made by Michael Coleman, PhD. He was then the professor of philosophy at Sonoma University. And this tape set had, I think it had maybe 8 tapes altogether in it. And some of them, when I looked at the labels, some of them I was familiar with. I had heard of reincarnation. I knew about existentialism. I knew about Freud. But there was this one tape that was marked Swedenborg. I didn't know what a Swedenborg was. I didn't know if it was something that was a prophylactic or something that you need a medical treatment for. I had no idea what it was. So I put the tape in, and the very first 10 minutes, this spiritual law comes up. You are what you love, and you love whatever you give your attention to. And I was looking at my health, and I was wondering if there was a correlation between what I'm giving my attention to and how my physical body was responding, because I had had a great deal of stress in my life. And I thought, this is the portal, this is the window for answering that question. Is my body eavesdropping in on my mind? Is my health organizing around my affection, what I love? Because everything is the keep it real arena. What are you doing with your love? Everything is reflecting back to you. What are you doing with your love? And if I give my attention to enough limited things, can it literally choke the life out of my body? Can it get that limited? And so that, when I listened to that day, that moment, that car ride, that indoctrination to this spiritual law, you are what you love, and you love whatever you give your attention to, that moment created a seed that rippled out and changed the rest of my life. Because I could not go unconscious. I couldn't sleepwalk anymore through life. I could not ignore accountability for what I was doing with my love. And I had to actively choose, what am I going to honor with my love? Am I going to give it to something that lives in an unlimited place? Or am I going to give it to limited things because I still think there's some payoff in that?
That is almost, without getting too biblical, the first commandment. Thou shalt have no gods before me.
Yes.
If I'm giving my love to this pen, I've just created a false god. And I'm going to get the ramifications of that senseless worship, so to speak.
Yes. Consciousness is love. It's indivisible from love. The only appropriate use of love is to return it to source.
Exactly.
Game over.
So let's get a little bit more into some of Swedenborg's teachings. What did Swedenborg say about karma and reincarnation?
That's a very common question. And
because, he comes from, basically, I know you didn't mention it, but he comes from a real, Christian background.
yeah,
so
he
to
was
speak.
born the son of a Lutheran bishop
Yeah.
in Sweden. So yeah, he was, really in that Christianity box. In the 18th century in Sweden, we speculate that there was no word reincarnation, that idea, that word, that concept had not filtered into 18th century Sweden by and large. And Freud had not been born yet, so even the words like conscious and unconscious, those words, those phrases had not yet been coined. So when he's describing consciousness, I think he does an incredibly beautiful job of describing the conscious and unconscious mind, but not using those terms because they didn't have those words. So because there was no concept of reincarnation, he's not going to really write about something that his audience has no concept of. But he does describe, when he's on the spiritual end of the spectrum, because he did travel to these spiritual realms, and he's looking at life not from our human perspective, but from a greater spiritual perspective, this is what he describes. He says, let's examine our life like it was a tree. There is a seed of energy from which we grow, from which our life sprouts. And we have a life where we grow and we produce fruit. And he says, but when it's the end of the life cycle of that tree doesn't die. It actually sprouts up again and starts another tree. So when you're looking at a human being, when you're looking at a human's life from the spiritual point of view, you're not seeing a tree. He said what you're seeing really is more like a forest of trees, and that's that one person. So some scholars look at that particular description and say, it sounds to me like he's describing reincarnation from a context of someone who didn't have the word, the definition of that phenomena did not exist culturally. And as far as karma, that keeps going back to this law. You are what you love, and you love what
you give your attention to.
If you give your attention to limited things, then you spiritually live in a limited place. What you give your attention to in the physical world determines where you live spiritually. And when you give your attention in the physical world to limited things, you move down the spiritual food chain and you live in a hellishly limited place. And anyone who worries, anyone who criticizes themselves or others, doesn't have to die to know that when you give your attention to that, your life gets hellishly ugly.
And you keep bringing it to you until you realize the folly of what you're giving your love to.
There's no payoff in it, and you choose to take your power back because you can.
And that's the lesson.
And that's the lesson.
Yeah. So that is at least a some cause and effect kind of statement, which is karma.
Exactly.
Yes.
If you do this, that happens. It's how I describe karma. If you do this, that happens, cause and effect. You give your attention to something unlimited, and you live in an unlimited place, and life gets good.
Exactly. Talk a little bit about his communications with the dead and how he explained that.
Oh, that's a hot topic. I love this. So Swedenborg started writing about his conversations with spirits that we would call angels and spirits we would not call angels. And his conversations with people who had crossed over, who had died. And he started publishing this, but he didn't put his name on it because he didn't feel that he wrote it. He felt he was just taking dictation. And so he just thought this was a more honest presentation. And when people found out that he was talking to the angelic realm, when people found out that he could talk to people who had crossed over, they came to him and asked him to get certain information. And the way that he first got found out is, you got to remember, we're talking the 1700s. Marconi isn't born, there's no wireless, there's no cell phone, there's no CN, there's no mass communication of any kind. And he would be in one location, surrounded by a group of people, and he'd be talking about something happening hundreds of miles away. And the people are saying, dude, because obviously that's 18th century Swedish vernacular, dude, how do you know this is going on? And he would say, well, the angels are telling me. And a lot of it was documented. Immanuel Kant, the German philosopher Immanuel Kant, was in Swedenborg's presence during one of these, the angel is updating me periods of time. And he took copious notes about everything that Swedenborg was talking about. It was concerning a fire. And then when the news finally got to where Immanuel Kant was sometime later, because it was hundreds of miles away, he took out his notes and everything that Swedenborg had said about the fire, where it started, when it started, how it started, what it burned, when it was put out, all the way from A to Z. Everything was exactly as Swedenborg had described it. And if you're just making that up, that's a pretty mean trick. And if people had sensitive information, let's say a loved one died with sensitive information, they would go to Swedenborg and say, can you find my loved one on the other side? And can you get the sensitive information? And Swedenborg, I define him as extremely Buddhist, because what he would do is he'd go into a trance-like state, And he'd talk to the angels. And he would say, this is a question that's being asked. This is the information that's being sought. Is it of benefit to all sentient beings? And if the angel said, it is a benefit to all sentient beings, go get it, he would. And if the angel said, you know, these people are just playing games, it's self-serving, don't do it, he wouldn't.
How did he, I mean, in that time frame, how did he avoid getting burned at the stake or, I mean, they didn't put up with that kind of stuff back then. They don't put up with that kind of stuff now.
That's another good question. So this goes back to the Queen of Sweden and her interaction with Swedenborg. Now, Swedenborg, in addition to being a scientist and an inventor, he's also a member of Sweden's parliament and a metallurgist. He was in charge of the mining and mineral excavation of Sweden. And so the Queen of Sweden knew who Emanuel Swedenborg was because he was in Parliament. And I kind of need to do a little background. When I'm talking about the Queen of Sweden, I don't mean this woman is a Swedish woman. She was born in Sweden and, came up from that background. She was German. And, there's a lot of intermarrying for political reasons. So her position there wasn't deeply endeared by the populace. And when somebody brought to her attention that Emanuel Swedenborg could talk to people who had died, she, always having her entourage and her posse around her, called him over once and said, it's been brought to my attention that you have the ability to talk to people who have died. Swedenborg acknowledged that, and she said, I was very, very close to my brother. It's probably one of the most important relationships in my life was my brother. And I was off doing my queenly duty, and I was doing queenly things, and I came back and found out he had died. And this is one of the biggest griefs of my life, is that I didn't get closure with him, I didn't get to talk to him, and I'm upset by this. I want you to find my brother and talk to him. This is important to me. So she was was emotionally compelled enough to kind of get over I'm the Queen of Sweden and I'm, talking to this guy about talking to my dead brother. So Swedenborg says that he'll do that, and he does. And he comes back a couple of days later, and she calls him over, and again, she's got her posse and her entourage around her. And she says, so did you find my brother on the other side? And Swedenborg said, I did. And she said, great, what does he have to say? And Swedenborg said, I'll tell you, but I'm not going to do it in front of these people. I'll do it privately, but it's sensitive information, and I'm not going to do it here. And she said, oh, come on, these are my peeps. Anything you can tell me, you can tell them. And he was steadfast, and he said, this is for your benefit. No, I will tell you, but it's got to be private. So they went to another room. There were I think there was some glass, like French doors, so they could be seen. There were, I think, over 18 witnesses to this. They could be seen, but nobody could hear what they were saying. And he whispered in her ear. And the witnesses said that she almost fainted. And she came out and she said, Swedenborg told me something that no living person would know. Only my dead brother knew this. I'm convinced that he found my brother and he talked to him. So when the church had an issue with Swedenborg, and they did, they stamped his writings heretical. And then when they went to stamp him a heretic, the King and Queen of Sweden said, I don't think so. No. He's one of our main advisors. Every one of his books, we get 2 copies of them. They go into the state library, and he is untouchable. You are not to touch this man.
And that's how he managed to survive.
Well, personally, I don't feel like you're doing any good work unless somebody labels you a heretic. So I'm hoping that somebody will email me, v@purplev.com, and label me a heretic. Then I will die knowing I have done substantial work.
So many topics. Let me ask you one other thing. What, if anything, did Swedenborg talk about with End of Times? Did he ever mention that? Did he ever talk about the meaning of Revelations? Or
He wrote a great deal about the Bible. And he wrote a great deal about the book of Revelations. And when Swedenborg is talking about the Bible, and he's talking about, you know, the whore of Babylon, and he's talking about these different images, one of the things that Swedenborg is always underscoring is that these are not outer world activities. These are states of being inside you.
again, Edgar Casey, same thing. The first 10 chapters are the physical, I'm trying to remember this now, the physical transformation you go through when your body is spiritualized,
Yes.
and the last 7 chapters are what the spirit goes through when you are spiritualized.
Yes.
Yes, exactly.
We have rockin' boyfriends.
Yes. The other thing he said, which was really interesting, was that the 7 kingdoms are the 7 chakras. You know, and fascinating stuff. I mean, there's a whole book of his readings just on the Revelation.
And Swedenborg was really, when he first started doing this, his main interest was to decode the Bible. Mm-hmm. So he's very prolific in examining the Bible.
And this is the basis of, and most people may not know this, but there's Swedenborg churches.
Yes.
And his decoding of the Bible are the basis of those churches.
Yes. And there's a whole Swedenborg Foundation. And in Westchester, Pennsylvania, is actually where there's the biggest concentration of Swedenborgian people. And there's beautiful, beautiful church that looks like it was teleported right from
beautiful, beautiful church
from Europe.
Yeah.
And you know who one of the more famous figures today who was highly influenced by Emanuel Swedenborg is? Dr. Mehmet Oz.
Who?
Dr. Oz. He's Oprah's doctor. He's got his own show. Yeah.
I never watched Oprah.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry.
I'm not big
Is that heresy?
No.
Okay.
I'm not big on a lot of allopathic medicine and pharmaceuticals, but he's an actually very enlightened physician. And he understands the whole idea of corresponding things in our physical reality to a spiritual dimension, which is not something you're going to hear the Surgeon General say.
No, probably not.
Needless to say.
Sadly, right?
Yes.
Okay, let's bring this conversation back to you.
Okay.
2 questions.
Yeah.
1, the name Washali. Where
Yeah.
does it come from? And the second question, you can answer in either sequence. What's with the purple?
I knew it, yeah. Ayurvedic psychology, Vedantic psychology, and Buddhist psychology and Taoist psychology, for that matter, all say that it is incredibly liberating for you to change your name several times over the course of your life, because there are limited states of existence that you identify with according to your name. When you're a little kid and your mom says, "Why are you so stupid?" When the bully calls your name just before they beat you, proving that you have no power. So there are certain ways that we constrict our definition of ourself because of the label. And when you change your name, you give yourself permission to expand your self-identification. So since I teach Vedantic psychology, I thought it would be grossly myopic if I told people, "Oh, by the way, you need to change your name," and then I cling to my same little tiny label. So I was given the name by a spiritual teacher, and I found it to be vastly useful. And I've just always had a thing for the color purple since I was a little kid. Fashion world didn't cater to the color purple when I was an adult. When I was a child. Very few things you could get in purple, but I'm an adult. I can buy my own things. I'm out of control.
But isn't there a spiritual connotation to the color?
Yes, there is.
Do you want to?
There is a number of references in the Bible to the violet flame, to a group of spiritual beings that carry a violet flame. And it's the color that represents transformation. And in Hinduism, Shiva's favorite color is purple. And Shiva is the destroyer of illusions. So I'm not arguing with Shiva. It's not good to argue with the destroyer of illusions. But Shiva is considered to be the most powerful, the most profound of all the gods, because Shiva was the only one willing to step forward and say, I will drink the world's poison and transform it into unconditional love. And purple is symbolic of taking the worst that life can throw at you, the world's poison, the world's toxicity, and turning it into alignment with unconditional love. And it doesn't get better than that, my love.
No, it doesn't. You know, it's interesting you say that, because the other transformative symbol that Hinduism uses is the lotus.
Yes.
Which, you know,
comes
same
from
thing.
the bud and then blooms in the sun. And Swedenborg would remind us that the sun represents divine love and wisdom, that the illumination from the sun is the wisdom, and the warmth we get from it is the love.
We got a few minutes left. I'm going to, just one last question about Swedenborg, and we'll get into the little wrap-up.
Okay.
What was Swedenborg's take on original sin?
Swedenborg does not see us as defective. Swedenborg at no time says that we are anything other than divine love and wisdom. And the only time we are not experiencing that is if we're not giving that truth our attention. We didn't come here damaged goods. We are divine love and wisdom in the process of realizing that.
Yeah, good. I mean, I have a big problem with that. That's why I wanted to throw that out there. Yeah, and again, I mean, we're not here competing, but one of the things Casey would say is that original sin is the use of the creative force for selfish purposes.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, I so agree with that. I mean, to think that, and to buy into the concept that a baby, just because of the nature of being born, has sin is obscene. And it was created by somebody who was a whack job to start with.
Clearly. It looks limiting, it sounds limiting,
Yes.
It takes you to a limiting place. It's not heaven's truth.
Mm-hmm. So, before we run out of time, and I know they've been flashing your information and probably putting some of your book covers up on the screen, let people hear from your own voice. How can I get a hold of you?
Okay, your one-stop shopping for the wild woman is the website is the best place to go, and that's purple, V as in violet, purplev.com. And you can learn more about the radio shows there, the individual sessions, the books. You can also email me if you would like, V as in violet, v@purplev.com. And if you're not on the internet and you want a phone number, you can call me at 239-513-3313. How easy is that?
Take advantage of it. Go to the website. It is, I don't want to use the word unique because that might, but it's unique. Great website, chock full of information. Check it out. Let me just make a couple of announcements, then we're going to come back and give you parting thought.
Okay, great, excellent.
First off, want to just let you all know that next week, and this is going to be a gift, we're actually doing 2 shows today. We're recording 2 shows today, and Washali is going to be with me as my co-host the next show. We're going to be interviewing Stephen Maines, who is an author, and you want to hear about these 2 books, and it's part of a series. The books are Longinus, and I'm going to mispronounce this, Meriden. Yeah, all these funky names. You know, I'm a Bronx boy, and I took English as a foreign language, and you do this stuff to me. Only thing worse is Hindu names, but we won't go there.
Right, with 8 syllables.
So you want to tune in next week to see that show. It's going to be a wonderful show, I promise you that. Mm-hmm. Also, anybody needs to contact me for any reason whatsoever. At the end of the show, there'll be rolling credits. You'll have a phone number, you'll have an email address, you'll have a website. Website is slightly out of date, but it's chock full of some good stuff. And also to you know that I do spiritual counseling. I'm also a state licensed alcohol drug abuse counselor. So I kind of play in both worlds. My firm belief is that without a spiritual component, we do not heal. I cannot and will never solve my problems with the same instrument that creates those problems. So my best thinking is only going to produce my best thinking, or as we say, the last person I used with was me. How good could I be to trust myself? Yeah, I know.
You rock, boyfriend.
So if anybody, if there's got any kind of life problems, any kind of addiction problems, any kind of problems, you want to just do a spiritual tune-up, contact me. I do not charge. I work on a donation basis. God takes care of me, whether it's through you or somebody else, I'm always taken care of. So feel free to reach out and contact me. So we got about 3-4 minutes left. I turn them over to you. Parting thought.
Okay. The parting thought that I always default to, although it's a lot shorter than 3 or 4 minutes, so
we'll fake it.
Okay. There is only one power that is useful to recognize, and that's divine love and wisdom. And there's only one story about yourself that is useful to have, and that is, I don't have love, I am love. And no one and no thing has the power to change that. And whenever you're looking at your life, if there's something that isn't working for you, you can trace it right back to how you see yourself. And if you're defining yourself as something other than a force of love, my suggestion is that you put it down, unless you're convinced that there's some payoff in it for you to see yourself as separate from love. Can't imagine what that payoff is, but if you think there's something in it for you, continue to mind that for all it's worth. And the other thing that I want to say is that this law, you are what you love, and you love whatever you give your attention to, will create a revolution in your life. Take that seed, it's a good seed, and plant you are what you love and you love whatever you give your attention to in your consciousness. And ask yourself as you're moving through your life and in your day, look at what you're giving your attention to and ask yourself, is this what you came to the planet Earth to do with your love? Is this what you want to build a monument to with your life? With your love, is that stuff? Or do you want to upgrade? Do you want to take your power back? You have free will.
Beautiful. And I just want to reinforce that. I think we did come here to create things that do not serve us, so we can learn to find out what does serve us. And that is what this is about. We are divine, whether you call it divine, whether you call it God, whether you call it love. I don't care what you call it, but you are it. If you can grab that, and like we're always saying, evaluate your life from that perspective. You get the ability to create your own reality. What are you doing with that? If you don't like it, if it's not serving you, if it's not putting a smile on your face, if you're not feeling warm and fuzzy, you can. All you got to do is change the focus. So I thank you so much.
My life would not be complete if I didn't get to come here and rock with you, wild man.
I think we've been pretty subdued. So until next week, remember, you are love. What are you doing with it? Thank you for tuning in. Blessings. I'm Reverend Phil, and I've been your host for Words of the Prophets. Thank you for tuning in. Please join me again next week, same time, same channel, for more Words of the Prophets.